I'm excited to be here because for the past year, I've been traveling the world asking leaders and thought partners and change makers, what's our plan for reducing our carbon footprint and climate change? And I was shocked most recently when I was in Princeton when some of the foremost thought leaders in the world told me that question was heavy. And I proceeded to start pushing back and saying there's no greater peril to our existence than to address this issue. And so when you rewind the work that we've done over the past 20 years in Pittsburgh, it's critical, as I look in this room represents the same type of room I've been in for 20 years. People who understand, people who are probably doing critical things in their lives at their levels to reduce their carbon footprint, people who are actively engaged in policies and practices and sit-ins and challenging politicians about the work. Who's not here? Or the people who probably don't know they're probably the most egregious non-environmentalist people because they don't know that they are. When you think about some of the most vulnerable and resilient people in the city, they live in spaces that add exponentially to our carbon footprint. They live in ways that exponentially increase our carbon footprint, all unbeknownst to them. Nobody's ever educated them on that kind of work. In 2014, after I got trained, in 2001, I got recognized by the Forbes Foundation as a 21st century environmental justice leader and was trained in San Francisco in the Climate Justice Corps. Came back to Pittsburgh, became part of the work on the Transportation Equity Act, did some policy work in DC, came back to Pittsburgh and did PTEP, Pittsburgh Transportation Equity Project, was the policy analyst for that, and began to really understand that there are basic fundamental things we can do to educate people so that they live their lives in a more harmonious way with our earth. Now as a planning commissioner for the city of Pittsburgh, I struggle because every 2 weeks we approve new buildings that don't actually reduce our carbon footprint, that don't mitigate stormwater management because the standards are antiquated. So I've been working with the city to try to adopt higher standards. Everybody in this room knows how slow politics works in government. Yet that doesn't preclude us from doing what we have to do. And so this past year, we hosted the Eco District's 10th Eco Districts Conference in the city of Pittsburgh. And for many people who participated in that from around the world for the past 10 years, they found this one the most diverse and innovative one that they've attended. So one of the things we do know, Google did an internal analysis of 2 teams. They looked at their homogeneous teams and their cross-functional teams, and they did an analysis to see which one outperformed the other. How many people know which one outperformed the other? The cross-functional team. All the places I travel around the world, they represent diverse stakeholders as part of the thought process and ideology. Every place except Pittsburgh. If we're going to figure out how to resolve this issue, the same people can't sit in the room every week talking about the problem. We have to really understand what does it mean to honor humanity, and how must we conduct ourselves differently if we only have one planet, and our time on this planet is coming close to our life cycle, and many of us want to leave this planet in a better place for our children and their children, and just for people in general. This year's Eco District Summit was critical because the city of Pittsburgh has adopted this year, or last year in 2019, Eco Districts as part of its comprehensive planning process. Everybody know that? Does everybody know that? Okay. What's critical about that is the communities that are next up for comprehensive plans, do you think they even know what eco districts is? No. They don't have a clue. So you have a dynamic where you have the city trying to be aggressive and adopt new standards to increase our energy efficiency. And they're pushing this model out to the communities that are most egregiously impacted by our current situation. And they're going to be asking that community to make decisions that's going to affect the next 50 to 100 years without being formally trained in understanding the positive or negative impacts of their decision-making as it reflects eco-districts. So I am pushing forward with a multi-sectoral cross-framework around at the micro, meso, and macro level to train up 7 communities over the next several months so that they can be more positioned to be strong partners as they think through this process. And I think we should applaud the city for adding this to their comprehensive plan, but we also have to take responsibility as citizens to increase the mental and physical and emotional capacity of people who in many ways are suffering to be part of a comprehensive planning process, right? And so this is not a theoretical process, it's metaphysical and emotional. Once you build something, it's there for a long time. And how we do that work is critical. In 2012, after I got certified in 2009 as a transition towns trainer, I asked Rob Hopkins if I could create an urban version of transition towns. And in 2012, at the Kingsley Association, we launched the Urban Transition Cities Movement. It was the first training apparatus in which 37 people of color participated in the 72-hour training apparatus. That was monumental. Rob reached out to me, was ecstatic about the fusion of that work, because in essence, we fused transition towns with eco districts and created a platform that informed community residents about their ideas that were then magnified by nonprofits that supported those ideas, and then they ran up into governments as formalized ideas that should be supported. Many of you know the outcome of this work most historically is by the Larmer Consensus Group's $30 million Choice Neighborhoods Award. That work came out of the work that I'm referring to in my role at the Kingsley Association. So we know and have evidence that we can educate, inform, and empower all people to be active participants and change agents in their community. What we don't know and haven't figured out is how do we do that in an ongoing way. Because many times, and in particular in Larmer, that set of community stakeholders, which was a sum total of about 15 community volunteers, they felt like they hit a home run, right? They got the $30 million, but the game still continued. There's more innings to the game. If you don't, for example, create succession planning, encourage more young people to get involved, you leave those kind of monumental pivots to a group of people who volunteered who felt like they ran their race. And by all states, they did. How are we preparing the next leg of this work for the next generation, and how are we ensuring that the work that we honor is being fortified by our thought processes, our ideologies, how we train up people, how we look at succession planning? These are all critical things that many of us think about, but we don't put energy into actualizing. Everybody knows what I'm talking about makes sense, but how many in this room has actually done that to their work or the work that they think is important in this sector? This work is our most critical work of our lifetime. We have to understand that the cross-pollination of the ideas in this room and the people not in this room will create something that Einstein refers to as collective genius, in my opinion. Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same energy that created it, meaning that we have to resonate at a different frequency to allow our synapses to fire at a different level that we see, as the Egyptians would say, out of our third eye. When we're able to see out of that eye, we're able to see things in an unknowing way that our human sense really can't capture, right? This is when we get into the metaphysical and spiritual development of each one of us in this room, despite my religious convictions or beliefs. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. What does that mean when we don't or are unwilling to work with each other for the sake of humanity? Some of this is implicit bias, some of it's unconscious. But in one of my presentations in Princeton, I said, if we understand this at the U.S. level, that 20% of the U.S. controls 80% of the wealth. Well, actually, 93% of the wealth. And then you got 80% of the country living off of 7% of the wealth. How do you create change of a macro level, global level, when we don't understand the need to share resources, to share thought ideologies, and to reposition ourselves as thought partners and leaders? Now, we can all go back to our places tonight and check the box and say, I've done my part. When you aggregate your part, does it create a tipping point for our current condition? If it does not, who else needs to be in this room to help create that tipping point? I would tell you that they're not here now, and if we don't get to them soon, they'll never be here. As you know, from 2013 to 2018, 8,000 people of color left Pittsburgh, 7,000 white people came to Pittsburgh. In 3 epicenters in the city of Pittsburgh, in the last 80 months, property values have increased up to 200%. If people don't realize Pittsburgh is changing right before our eyes, then you are asleep. The people who are walking around this city now, running with their dogs and cats and children, and I'm not mad at them, but they are coming into a situation that they think is a plus. If I'm coming from the West Coast and I could get a 1,200 square foot house for 150,000, 200,000, and in LA it was 1.3 million, I hit a home run coming to Pittsburgh. If I, at the same time, get a job at Google making 300,000, plus I sold my house, I'm cash flush. I've been in Pittsburgh most of my entire life. I've never seen more Maseratis and sports cars in the city than I've seen in the past 3 years. Those are toys, because they don't make sense to drive them around our streets, right? You can't go fast anywhere in the city. And so these are eye candy, because people have resources that this is what they're attracted to. And so I will say this as I round out my conversation, and I think Carl will take this further. In the last 24 months since I've been at the Forbes Funds, we restructured our grant making to move from program grant making to systems grant making. After unfreezing our assets in 4 quarters, our grants making increased per organization by 400%. Our average grants in 27 and going into 2018 went to 1.3 organizations. Today they're going to 5.0 organizations. We've aggregated our grants against 2 dynamics. One is the social determinants of health. The second one is the UN SDGs. We just had a meeting Friday with the RSA, the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturing, and Commerce, and we'll be starting a Pittsburgh chapter here as well. We'll be heading to Mexico soon to do the OC, the Opportunities Collaborative, to create a global framework for our work. If we don't begin linking our regional, local, national, international, and global activity we're going to lose our opportunity to be significant and relevant. As many of the people in this room know, the UN is going to launch a 2020-2030 initiative. As I talked to Ambassador Mendelsohn a few weeks ago and some other colleagues at the UN, I asked them, what role do Black and brown people play in that initiative? They're not at the table. As we fast track ways to mitigate risks and to resolve social phenomenon, we always have to think about how our most oppressed brother and sister should be part of that process. Or we unconsciously, knowingly and willingly create a permanent second class. As a result of that, there's no thought ideology from that group because they're in survival mode, while many of us in this room are in thriving mode. The ultimate question I leave you with to ponder is, how do you demonstrate your humanity? If we have one earth to live on and we're destroying it, our carbon footprint is over 400 parts per million. It's never been that high. What are we willing to do differently to reduce that number? And who else needs to be part of the process so that they become assets and not liabilities? Thank you.